Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Mercola helping you take control of your health. And today we have the privilege of talking with Gabe Brown, who's written a new book, Dirt to Soil, that you'll really enjoy. You may recognize Gabe from a previous interview when I visited him at his farm near Bismarck, North Dakota. And that was last year ago. I remember that very well. It was like 2 days after my mom had just passed, and it was actually on my birthday. So it was a number of events connected, but I really enjoyed the visit there. And his book really expands on some of the information we went on in the last interview. So welcome, and thank you for joining us, Gabe.
Thank you, Dr. McCullough. Pleasure to see you again.
Yes, indeed. And I had opportunity as was out at your farm. I visited not only you, but your family and Paul, who is the next generation, your son, that's taking it over. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Um, So you've got a 5,000-acre ranch out there, and your wife, Shelley, that you farm with, that you purchased. You have an interesting story. So why don't you give us a brief summary? I think we reviewed a little bit on last time, but it's really, you're an inspiration. You're such a leader in this field. You are the leader, one of the major leaders in regenerative agriculture in the United States, and helping farmers understand how to do it the right way, and where there's such a desperate need for this knowledge. And I really, we're going to dig deep in that. I want to get an idea of your perspective, the percentage of farmers who don't understand this, and the type of headway it's making. But before we get into that, if you're watching this, it's really important to understand that even though you may not be a farmer, I realize you have a deep appreciation of the importance of it, but if you know someone who is farming, you simply must get them into Gabe's work. He teaches all over the country, all over the world. I think he's home more than he's at his farm teaching, but this information he has is really life-changing. It's going to be essential to continuing the transformation back to a healthy regenerative soil. So welcome and thank you for joining us, Gabe. And why don't you give this a brief summary that I tangented from?
Well, thank you, Dr. McCullough. It's a pleasure to be with you. So, briefly, a little bit of history. This ranch that my wife and I and son operate now was founded by my in laws back in 1956, and they farmed it in the conventional type model with tillage and all the synthetic fertilizers and herbicides and monocultures from 1956 until 1991 when my wife and I purchased it from them. And then what happened is I grew up in town, so agriculture was new to me. I learned, got a couple of degrees from North Dakota State University in animal science and ag economics. So I learned the industrialized, commoditized production model. And my father-in-law, when we returned to the place here, he taught me those principles. Well, then what happened, it never made sense to me. It didn't make sense why in a dry environment we'd be tilling the soil and would watch the topsoil blow away. And so I was always one, I couldn't learn enough. So I studied and I read Alan Savory's work on holistic plant grazing, and I read about no-till. And so I went down the path of changing our grazing model, and I bought a no-till drill. But what really changed our lives were 4 years, 1995 through 98, when we lost three crops to devastating hailstorms and one crop to a drought. So we went 4 years of basically no cash grain income or no crops to harvest. And that put us in pretty dire financial straits. The bank wouldn't loan us any money anymore to buy all these expensive inputs. And so I had to learn, how do I take that dirt that I had at that time and make it into productive soil? So it set me on a 25 plus year journey, and I'm still on that journey of converting dirt to soil. And that's how the book came about. And that got us to the point we are today, where a group of us spend the majority of our time traveling around North America trying to teach other producers to take their operations into their own hands and make a difference by producing truly nutrient dense foods.
Yes, and your story, which you thank you for the brief summary, exactly what I was looking for, and reminds me to share with our audience that you are an amazing example. Most normal human beings would have quit after the first, or certainly the second disaster that you
Yeah.
had, but you went on after the third and continued after the fourth. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just normal human beings don't do that. So I guess it's your strong faith that facilitated that process and to continue in the face of all these disasters that you had which essentially would have ruined most families.
That's right. The ironic thing is, of all my neighbors in close proximity, several of them had those devastations 2 years, and one neighbor was hit 3 years with the result of those natural disasters. But we were the only ones who got hit all 4 years. And I really think God purposely led me down this path and said, okay, I'm showing you this to force you into a different type of production model. And that's the model of regenerative agriculture. And I tell people those 4 years were the hardest thing we ever could have gone through, but it was absolutely the best thing that could have happened to me, because I never would have went down this path, my family and I, if we had not been a subject to those natural disasters.
Yeah, it's an amazing example of a philosophy that I really live my life by, which is pronoia, or being an inverse paranoid, and that it's inevitable. Every single one of us is going to go through catastrophes. There's no way getting out of this life alive or out of this
Yeah.
life without going through them. So the perspective is to have the viewpoint that it's always some good coming out of it, and you have a tremendous example of that good manifesting, and there's no way you would have actually chosen to go down that path, but the benefits were tremendous and changed your life.
Right. That's right. While we were going down this path, I met a lot of individuals that taught me different things on regenerative agriculture and how soil functions. But I was attending a conference in 1997, and there was a rancher from Alberta, Canada there. His name is Don Campbell, and he said this to me, and it stuck with me ever since. He said, if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. And after hearing that, I heard him right after our third year of natural disasters, and I realized I have to change the way I look at our soils. It's not just dirt, it truly is a living, functioning ecosystem. And the problem is that most producers do not treat it as such. And if I would just focus on what does the soil need in order to thrive and in order to make all those nutrients available to the plants, I could truly produce nutrient dense food.
Yes, indeed. So the the title of your book is Dirt to Soil. And I read another book, which I don't know if you've encountered before. It's called Dirt, The Erosion of Civilization by David Montgomery. And if are you familiar with that book?
As a matter of fact, David and his wife Ann were just on my ranch 10 days ago. And I'm very
Oh!
familiar about it. And then David spent 10 days on the ranch with me when he wrote his book, Growing a Revolution. And
Oh,
so
that's great.
David and I are good friends. And as a matter of fact, him and Ann were here because they're starting another book that's going to deal with nutrient density in foods. And they asked me to collaborate a bit with them on that one.
Well, you'll have to connect me with him because I definitely want to interview him for that book.
I can do that.
So the um, the reason I bring that book up is he does a really nice job of outlining the disasters that we've had historically. It's not just in the 21st century, in his book, and his figures are probably more current. I mean, they're dated, but there's millions of tons of topsoil that eroded every year into the Mississippi Basin, and that sounds like a lot, but it's like billions of or 4 billion tons of soil are lost annually around the world every year. I mean, that's just crazy. It's such a precious resource. And so we've been doing this for ages. And in Europe, they would farm the land, use all the resources, and then move on. That's the
That's
historical
right.
precedent. There's very few cultures that really understood this regenerative agriculture principles. The United States is certainly not one of them, but you're leading the transition away from that. So why don't you, if you could expand on that, would be great.
Well, you're exactly right. Uh, Dr. Montgomery, the subtitle of his book is The Rise and Fall of Civilizations. And it's how all the great civilizations in the world have risen and then fallen based on how they treat their soil. And when my partners and I go around and teach regenerative agriculture, one of the quotes that we use is one of how on the eastern seaboard the soil was being depleted, so a westward expansion needed to be made. And the gentleman who gave that quote was none other than George Washington. So, way back, our first president was telling the citizens of the newly formed country, we have to move westward because we've depleted the soil. Another interesting analogy that I like to give that puts it into perspective for all people is if you hold up a sheet of paper, just a
Mhm.
newspaper or book, the thickness of that thin sheet of paper is the equivalent of 1 ton of topsoil per acre. So if we have a windy day, it's very easy if you have bare tilled soil, you're going to lose a ton of topsoil on an acre of land. Well,
Mhm.
that's just unacceptable. And another thing we talk about a lot is how, look in the 1930s, we see all these visions of the Great Dust Bowls. But here we are in 2018, and there is the same thing happening. We were recently teaching a school in Oklahoma, and they had to close the interstate in Oklahoma because of so much soil blowing that it caused reduced visibility. You know, there was deaths in Nebraska this spring from blowing soil. Colorado, we're seeing it all over. And so, what we're trying to uh, enable all people to see is the fact that we can stop, and
Mhm.
it's just a matter of following nature's principles. Let's work with nature to cover the soil, to have green growing plants, to cycle that carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back in the soil in that cycle where it belongs. And it'll be for the betterment of all society and
Yes,
all
indeed.
ecosystems.
Sure. And the I'd like to get your take on the prevalence of this, the farmers who are really not listening to you or others like you, and integrating this and violating one of their first primary rules is never have bare, or virtually never have bare soil. You've always got to have something in the ground. And if something's in the ground, you're not going to have a ton of topsoil blowing away on a windy day, which they wouldn't have had in Nebraska and Colorado that you described. So what percentage of farms are you seeing on a national basis that are making the transition? Is it like 75% are not doing it, or where are we at?
Unfortunately, Dr. Mercola, as hard as many people are working to change things, we need to be honest, it's less than 5% of the farmers and ranchers worldwide are adopting these practices. In saying that, the snowball is starting to move downhill, and there's more and more inquiries every day. Uh, those of us who are out touting the benefits of regenerative agriculture are overwhelmed with producers who want to make a change. You know, right now there's a real crisis going on in rural America. Suicide rates are at an all-time high among farmers and ranchers. I've talked to several lenders and CPAs, and financially, farmers and ranchers are really strapped. It's due to low commodity prices and an overproduction, a number of things, which all show us that the current production model is not working.
Mhm.
You know, I just read an interesting quote on a flight home yesterday, and it said it was by Wendell Berry, and he was talking about the current production model of industrialized ag, commoditized, high inputs, is going to do the same thing to capitalism that it did to socialism.
Mhm.
And when you really think about it, that's kind of the path we're on. We're in this production model where it's just produced, it's all about pounds and yield, and it's not about producing truly nutrient dense foods in a way that can regenerate our ecosystem. And we have to change this model.
Yes. And part of the change to help address the suicides that are occurring, not only in the United States, but it's really pervasive in India too. It's a leading cause of death over there because of the agricultural element. But part of the change is shifting their mindset from a conventional approach to more of an entrepreneurial approach, which is what you've done. I mean, you've really integrated it, and there's an absolute market for that. And pretty much everyone watching this is part of your market who wants nutrient dense, healthy food free of contamination. So
That
people want it.
that's right.
It's probably the majority of the population who understands and wants it. So the market is huge. It's just a matter of educating those farmers of how to do this. And that's what you're in the process of doing. Because if you just farm the conventional way, even with regenerative techniques, you still have to make that additional jump of providing it in an entrepreneurial fashion so that you can actually be successful and continue the enterprise.
That's exactly right. One of the things, thanks to my son Paul, that we've been able to uh, concentrate on our operation is how do we not only produce and grow and raise those nutrient dense products, but how do we offer them to consumers? And what we've decided to do is to market as much as possible of what we produce directly to the consumer. And then we let the consumers be the judge. One of the things we do on our operation, we have an open door policy, meaning any person can drive on our ranch at any time and look at anything they want. And to me, that's the best. You know, you can have all these labels and standards, but if people see it with their own eyes, if they get to know the farmer or rancher and see what we do, see how we care for our animals, see how we care for the soil, that builds trust. And
Mhm.
once they taste the product and their bodies will be satiated, their bodies will know this is good, this is nutrient dense, I want it. Then they're a customer for life.
Yeah, that's a great model, and hopefully, many of the people that you're lecturing to are starting to adopt this because we so desperately need these local resources that people can get food in their community that is healthy and
Mhm.
free from toxins. So, major component. Now, one of the, I mean, we'll talk about the other principles that you have, but one of the values or benefits of that is that it will allow the soil to retain more moisture. And when I was there at your farm last year, I think you had less than an inch, and that was in July, the middle of July, or the beginning of July, and I think you had less than an inch of rain that year.
Yeah,
Hopefully, it's a little better
we
this year.
tried. We ended up last year with 5.6 inches of rainfall for the
Wow.
entire year. Now, we did have a bit of snow last winter with added. We started out real dry this spring, but fortunately, the last couple of weeks we've caught some rain, a couple inches of rain, which has certainly helped matters. But the thing of it is, if we focus on growing plants, and my business partner Ray Archuleta always says, plant and soil are one. We have to
Mhm.
have healthy plants in order to have healthy soil. And we have to have healthy soil in order to have healthy plants. And so, if we focus on that, the soil as an ecosystem, we're going to tremendously increase the water holding capacity of the soil. And this is good not only for farmers and ranchers, but also for gardeners and homeowners. You know, if they focus on the healthy soil, we'll find we need much, much less moisture to produce crops and forage for livestock, etc. And so it's all an ecosystem working in tangent, working together, but we have to concentrate on what that soil needs first.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So maybe you can expand on the other principles because once those are applied, and they're just general principles, whether you can use in your garden or your
Mhm.
community garden or on a large farm like the 5,000 acre operation that you have, and certainly larger operations can use it.
Yeah. And uh, there's five principles of a healthy soil ecosystem. And no matter where I travel all over the world, these principles are the same. Now, the tools used, you know, the type of equipment, the type of livestock, the varieties of crops are different, but the principles are the same. And those five principles are simply this: least amount of mechanical or chemical disturbance possible. We don't want to be tilling the soil any more than we have to. We don't want to be, certainly don't want to be adding all these synthetics, fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. So we need to keep that to a bare minimum, if at all. And that's the first principle. Second
Well, but
principle,
let's
oh,
stop at
go
the
ahead.
first
Okay.
because that is in direct contradiction, at least from my understanding, to what's been taught as rock solid basic information for the last century or two. Is that right?
Yeah, well, look, we've been tilling the soil for centuries.
Hmm.
And David Montgomery in his book Dirt shows that the more we till, the faster the soil degrades and is destroyed. And that's why people had to move. That caused the collapse of those civilizations. Now, from a synthetic input standpoint, it was after World War II when they had all these factories that were making bombs. What were they going to do with all the nitrogen? Well, let's put it on the soil. Well, what we're finding, what really happened was uh, by adding synthetic nitrogen to the soil, that biology then, because everything has a carbon to nitrogen ratio, starts consuming the carbon in the soil aggregate, and it starts destroying soil structure, no water infiltration, no water holding capacity. So you're exactly right. It's directly antagonistic to what is needed in a healthy soil ecosystem.
Okay, good. So no till, and I think that was one of the strategies that you use, and I guess you encourage other farmers to do too, is to sell your equipment so you can't till, you can't go back. It's like burning the ships, you know.
Yeah,
There's only one way
that's right.
forward.
But back when I went down this path, the only way I could afford to buy the no-till drill, I had to sell my tillage equipment. But then
Mhm.
I was all committed. I was all in. I had to make it work. And I encourage other producers to do the same. And there are, especially here in the Great Plains, the upper Midwest, no-till is common. Probably 70+% of the producers use no-till. But they haven't adopted the other practices that are needed to make that soil ecosystem healthy.
Yeah, before you go into there, I want to emphasize a point. I mentioned at the beginning that you're in North Dakota. Some people who don't know U.S. geography may think that's part of the Midwest, which had at one point the best, or some of the best soil in the entire world. But it really is a pretty challenging environment to grow. Probably one of the most challenging environments in the United States. So the point being that if you can get these principles to work in Bismarck, North Dakota, they're going to work pretty much anywhere.
That's right. And as a matter of fact, Dr. Mercola, last week my team and I were up in Manning, Alberta, which is, it's 6 hours north of Edmonton. I
Mm.
mean, it's up there. You
It's
almost
even
think Arctic
colder in the winter.
Circle.
It's even
Yeah, you almost think Arctic Circle. And they're using these same practices up there.
wow.
So my point
And
being,
are they working? You getting feedback
yes,
on
yes, they are. We had a great group of producers up there who are really starting to move down the regenerative path. So we're excited about that. But it doesn't matter where you're at. We've taught these principles in Australia, and we've been in Mexico, and there's producers in South Africa and in Germany, and Russia, and all former Russia, all over the world using these principles. They work
them?
anywhere.
Yeah. So I interrupted you. So the one is no till, and then maybe you
Yep.
can go into the armor
Yeah.
next, keeping the soil
Yeah.
covered at all times.
Yeah, and this is one that not only farmers and ranchers, but gardeners also need to pay attention to. You know, it just baffles me why when I visit my urban friends, they're always tilling up their garden. They think they got a
Urban
road
friends.
tiller. And it's like, my goodness, that's the worst thing that we can do is to till, because what tillage does, it destroys soil aggregate, it destroys the mycorrhizal fungi, the home for all the biology, and it's that network that transfers nutrients. We're not going to have truly nutrient dense food unless we stop the tillage. And then we have to have the armor or the skin on the soil surface. That skin, if you walk into a forest or into a prairie land, you don't see bare soil. You see that it's covered. And that armor protects the soil. When it rains, those raindrops fall very fast and they can erode that topsoil. When there's very windy days, that wind, as we discussed earlier, can blow that topsoil away. And also that armor protects the soil from heating and cooling. And what it's there for is to create the optimum environment for biology so that biology can live and thrive and produce the nutrients that are needed.
Yeah, this is one of the principles that you kind of discovered by accident, I guess, in your 4 years of hardship and
That's
adversity, because you couldn't harvest the crop, so you just let them stay on the
yeah.
soil and you covered the soil.
That's right. When I look back at what was really occurring, it was a plan much greater than my own because I wouldn't have been smart enough to leave that. But those hailstorms, they devastated the crop and put it all down on the soil surface where I had no way to mechanically remove it. But that was the best thing that could have happened because through no-till and then that armor, I was actually starting to grow topsoil.
Yeah, yeah, which was a major transition from the last 50 years. Your in-laws purchased the property in the 50s, right? So
That's correct.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so going on from there, I guess the next step is armor would be maybe living roots because that's sort of an extension. Because if you've got living roots growing, you've got the armor.
Yeah, we have to understand how soil is formed, and soil is formed from growing plants taking in CO2 out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis. They produce all these amino acids and carbohydrates, and then they pump a part of that, what's sometimes referred to, Dr. Christine Jones referred to it as liquid carbon, is pumped out through the roots as root exudates into the soil. And you might ask, well, why would the plant pump out part of what it produces into the soil? Well, the answer is to attract biology, which provide all the nutrients the plants need to grow. So we need a living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year in order to feed that biology and cycle that carbon out of the atmosphere. And that's one of the reasons we're having this problem we're seeing globally today of too much carbon in the atmosphere. We need to
Hmm.
get it. We need to grow more plants all the time as long as possible in order, and the plants will do it. The plants will pull it out of the atmosphere and pump it into the soil where it can be cycled via biology.
So you've just met with David recently. Does he believe that the turning point has occurred and this reversal can actually happen in our lifetimes before it's too late?
I have the good fortune of meeting with many, many scientists and
Yeah, yeah.
others who are well versed in this problem we're seeing, and all of them now believe that the keys. Well, I should say this. The majority of them now believe that the keys to mitigating the problems we're seeing are twofold. Number one, we need to change the current production model and have a living root in the ground as long as possible. And that means diversity in living plants. The second thing is we have to have animal integration. We have to take the animals out of the feedlots and out of confinement where they don't belong and put them back out on the landscape. And you hear a lot of people saying, oh, cattle are causing global warming, and nothing could be further from the truth. And I give this analogy. Just imagine back what it must have been like centuries ago when we had the large herds of bison and elk moving, and they were all over North America moving. But what was really happening? Those ruminants were taking a bite out of that forage, that grass and those forbs, and then that plant, in order to regrow, had to pump more carbon into the soil. See, if we remove the animals from the ecosystem, we can grow a plant and we can pump some into the soil, but not near as much as if we would have animals grazing. So that's the two keys: living plants, and then we have to integrate animals again.
Well, it's my understanding that some people may argue that cattle are part of the problem, but more specifically, it's conventionally raised cattle who are eating grains that they were never designed to eat, and as a result, changing the microbiome and eliminating methane, which is a pretty pernicious way to destroy ozone. And it takes so much more uh, food to raise them that way as opposed to raising them the way you are and other regenerative agriculture farmers. So it's the model that they're being raised that's the problem. And then of course they're not recycling their nutrients back into the soil the way we're designed to. And you don't have to
Yeah.
when the animals are grazing, they're automatically putting their urine and their feces back into the soil, not into some massive feedlot.
That's exactly right. And then also you never hear in this equation methanotrophs. Methanotrophs are organisms that feed on methane that livestock expel. So as an animal's out grazing, these methanotrophs take care of that methane. Well, we
Ah,
don't have that in the feedlots, and in
yeah.
confinement, there's not methanotrophs. And the other thing is, look at fossil fuel usage to produce all of the grains, and then you got to harvest the grains and then haul them to the feedlots or into, it's not only beef cattle, it's also hogs that are in confinement, it's poultry that's in confinement, and it's a tremendous fossil fuel usage that we can get away from if we switch to a more regenerative production model.
Yeah, and you've got some really innovative ways to reduce that fuel usage even more. The way you in your brutal winters, I mean, you have to feed the cows, and most people think that well, it's like impossible to raise a grass-fed cow in the winter, especially in North Dakota. But that's nothing could be further from the truth. And you
And
and you devise ways to put the food out there so you don't even have to haul it out every day. So why don't you talk about that? Because it's a pretty
yeah,
clever trick
so
you guys developed.
well, one of the things that misconceptions many people have is that, oh, you can't do this everywhere. So we got to stay in the current
Hmm.
production model so we can get food everywhere. Nothing could be further from the truth. Animals are adaptive. They will adapt to the environment. Our cattle graze for the majority of the year. In fact, some winters we're able to literally graze through the whole year without
Mm.
feeding any processed hay. Now, we do get some major blizzards here, and at
Hmm.
those times, what we've done is we're prepared. We do put up some forage in hay bales, but we leave them out on the land where that forage was grown, and then our cattle graze on those bales at such time where they can't physically graze grass. And so by leaving that hay bales out there, the cattle are grazing there. They leave their manure there. The nutrients from the bale are left right there, and it's a process that keeps that land healthy. Also, the animals get exercise, and I tell people, many people say, "Oh, the animals are better off in a feedlot." I said, "Really? Just open the gate. Just open the gate. Those they don't want to stand on their own feces all day and lay in it. They want to be out. That's how they evolved over time."
Yes, indeed. And it's interesting too when they finish feeding on those bales of hay. The because I've seen in last July where those hay bales were, and then there's this massive new growth that it's like a fertilizer there that occurs, and you get
Yeah.
incredible growth when the bales are gone.
And that's right. What's happening is it's carbon.
Hmm.
The animals feed there, so through the manure and through any parts of the hay bale that they don't eat is adding carbon to the ecosystem. Well, everything's comprised of carbon. We are, biology is, plants are, animals are, and carbon is the most limiting factor in production agriculture today. Well, because of that excess extra carbon that was put there, from the animals consuming that bale, now we have this tremendous flush of forage, and it's not uncommon to triple or quadruple the forage biomass production where that hay was. So we're accelerating the regeneration of our ecosystems while allowing the animals to lead the kind of lifestyle that they would prefer to lead.
Yeah, and what one of the points I want to get back to is the microbial diversity that you refer to, and a really interesting statistic that you cite in your book, and it's not intuitively obvious, is that 95% of the life living on the land is in the soil. It's not us, it's not the rabbits and the squirrels or the insects, it's in the soil.
That's right. It's been said by several soil microbiologists that there's more microorganisms in a teaspoonful of healthy soil than there are people living on this world. Think
Yeah.
about that. So I challenge farmers and ranchers and gardeners, how many of you out there have thought about feeding the life in the soil? We think about feeding plants, we think about feeding humans, we think about feeding animals, but we don't think of all this biology in the soil. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, was to just to get people thinking, how do I take dirt and convert it to soil, healthy soil that's teeming with life? And that leads into uh, one of the other principles, which is the principle of diversity. We
Hmm.
want many different species of plants, animals, insects, and especially soil life. Today's production model is all about monocultures. You travel and all you see is corn and soybeans and spring wheat and cotton. You don't see these very diverse ecosystems that our native prairies once were. And you don't see all the animals and insects. And then, of course, many times with our naked eye, we can't see the microorganisms in the soil, but we need all those things to create a healthy ecosystem, which in turn will give that plant the nutrients it needs to nourish our bodies.
Yeah, so why don't you comment on the magnificent transition that occurred on your ranch after you've made this movement towards regenerative agriculture with respect to the wildlife that was there and the diversity of the wildlife, which is just
Yeah,
extraordinary.
yeah.
And it really is quite in contrast to the wildlife present on your neighbors' properties.
Well, that's true. When I first moved here, my wife and I in 1983, after we graduated from college, we moved back here to be a part of this ranch. And I tell people I would never see a deer. I'd never see a pheasant. Rarely would I see a grouse. You'd see a few songbirds, but very rarely. And talk in my book about how I never once did I see my father-in-law take a spade and put it in the soil to see what the soil looked like or check for earthworms. And over time, this transition, this path we've gone on now, I mean, I can sit on my front porch any evening and count 50 to 100 deer grazing. In the evening, we see pheasants and hawks and owls and grouse and partridge and a myriad of songbirds. And as a matter of fact, the Audubon Society was doing bird surveys on our land just here a year ago, and they found nesting piping plover, which are a endangered or they're listed species. And they said, well, that's impossible. The river's 10 miles away. They don't nest. There has to be a river for them to nest. Well, evidently not. We have them nesting on our property. So it's kind of the thing that if you build it, they will come. So these animals and insects and birds, they all know what's healthy and they know what they need as far as habitat and food to survive. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to see all that life on one's farm or ranch.
Yeah, and the downside is because there's a downside for everything, but I think you related to me that the deer that you mentioned, they don't feed on your neighbor's land. They come to your land to eat. They want the nutrient dense food. They don't want
Yeah.
that monocrop garbage.
It was interesting here a few years ago. I had one field and it was 30 acres of corn, but it was non GMO corn, open pollinated, no synthetics on it, no pesticides, because we just don't use any of that. My neighbor had 600 acres of corn right next to me. Well, every evening I would watch, and there was literally up to 75 deer every evening. They would walk out of his corn where they had bedded during the day, walked all the way over a half mile to my field, and that's where they would eat. If that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what does.
Deers aren't stupid.
No,
It's hard to confuse an animal.
that's right.
Uh, Now, and when those 40 acres of corn you were going, I think you grow other crops in there too. It's not a monocrop, right? So you're putting. Why don't you describe
Yes.
that process? Because it's unusual and it's something that typically farmers don't do.
Yeah. So the principle of diversity. You have to have diversity. And you look at how native ecosystems perform, they don't just have a grass plant, they always have legumes and forbs. So, what are we doing in production agriculture today? I don't care if it's large scale industrial ag or our garden, we're planting just monoculture. Well, what I'll do with my corn, for instance, we will go in and we'll plant corn, but then along with the corn, there will be vetches and clovers and understory growing underneath that corn. So we're not only feeding the soil microorganisms from the root exudates of that corn plant, but also from all these legumes. And the legumes are helping take atmospheric nitrogen and provide it to the corn plant. So when the deer come to eat, they have a smorgasbord of different species. And it really, people think, well, but those other plants are going to compete with your corn crop. Nature doesn't work that way. Nature is much more collaborative than competitive. That's how it is. So we
Yeah.
do the same thing in our garden. We will have a row of sweet corn, but right next to it, we'll have a row of peas, and on the other side, a row of beans. And so the row may be a monoculture crop, but growing together is all these different species and flowering species attracting all the pollinators and the predator insects. We haven't used a pesticide on our ranch in over 20 years. And the reason is there's no need to. We have the predator insects that keep the pests in balance.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And I forget the statistics, but it's like for every predator, well, for every pest insect, there's like 600 or 700
Yeah.
beneficial insects.
Yeah, it's actually 1,700.
Oh,
There's
1,700. Okay.
1,700 for every one that's a pest.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
crazy. So I'd like to get your insights as an insider because we just described this process where nature is collaborative and not competitive, but that doesn't exist with the humans. So you're an insider in the agriculture industry, and as I think in your book you mentioned only 3 companies control over 75% of the agrochemical industry, and there's probably other monopolies. So why don't you summarize as an insider what the conventional farmer is up against if he decides to make the transition to regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, and I often say the biggest hangup or issue producers have in moving down the regenerative path, unfortunately, is USDA in the current farm program.
Hmm.
Because the current farm program offers what's called revenue insurance or crop insurance to farmers, and it's highly subsidized by the federal government. Now, my ranch, our family, we chose to bow out of that. We just don't take part in that. I think it's ridiculous that nobody is subsidizing Ma and Pa's restaurant on Main Street, you know, right? If they don't get clients showing up, well, why should I be subsidized? If I can't make a living farming and ranching without these subsidies, I shouldn't be doing it. So, but the current production model, the vast majority, well over 95% of the farmers and ranchers in this country are getting those forms of subsidies, but there's strings attached. And those strings are, well, you have to produce in the current production model. You have to produce monocultures, and it's focused totally on yield or pounds in the case of animals,
Hmm.
not on nutrient density. And
Hmm.
we're not looking at what harm it may or may not be causing to the ecosystem. So the farmers can't go get a loan from the lending institution unless they take part in that program. Well, the program's going to dictate which crops will give them the greatest revenue insurance. In
Hmm.
other words, guarantee them a certain price. Well, what happens is the farmers aren't stupid. They're going to gravitate to whichever crop, and it's corn, soybeans, cotton, spring wheat, that offer them the greatest return. And so what you have then is you have more and more farmers producing these same crops, driving the prices down even further, while at the same time degrading our soil resources. So it's this vortex farmers and
Hmm.
ranchers are in. They're stuck on a hamster wheel going nowhere. And the whole point of my book, I just wanted to share, and it's just the story of our journey on what we did to get out of that trap, what we did to take control of our own destiny. And let's instead of relying on the government to dictate these things, let's be a price maker instead of a price taker. And let's do it in a way that we can regenerate our resources so that future generations have the opportunity to be sustainable. I
Yeah,
get
go ahead. Sorry.
I get really tired that the mantra lately from many people and many companies is sustainable, sustainable. We want to be sustainable. And I tell farmers and ranchers, why in the world would we want to sustain a degraded resource? that makes no sense to me. We can't afford to be sustainable. We have to be regenerative. And the 5 principles I share in this book are those that will empower people to be regenerative.
Yeah, yes, indeed. So I'm quite familiar with the challenges that big pharma and really big food and now the telecommunications industry have on influencing federal legislation and federal regulatory agencies. So, I've come to the conclusion that it's virtually impossible to change those policies, and you've got to go from the ground up and teach people other alternatives because these powerful industries have really controlled the federal government. Because I believe firmly that the federal government isn't good or bad. It's just a tool. Like a gun isn't good or bad. It's just how you use it. And it's unfortunately it's controlled by these industries. So would you is from your take, because I don't understand this industry like you do, is that the same position we're in? Is there ever any hope of changing these USDA policies that incentivize the farmers to do this, or you just got to get it from the ground up like we're doing with the other strategies?
Dr. Mercola, I agree with you 100%. I wrote a chapter in my book on what I see through my eyes
Mm-hmm.
as the fallacies of the current production model.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you, we're not going to change that. The only way things are going to change are twofold. One, if the farmers or ranchers themselves decide to make a change. Because let's face it, farmers go out there and they go to spray a chemical on a crop. They know that's not a good thing, but they're just in this model. How do they get out of it? Well, they have to want to change. And that's why myself and my partners at Soil Health Consultants have formed this Soil Health Academy where we travel around teaching these principles so people can take it control of their own destiny. The main way, though, that this model is going to change is if the
Mm-hmm.
consumer demands it. And
Mm-hmm.
no one knows better than you the health problems that are occurring worldwide due to this industrialized, commoditized production model, which is just producing empty calories. It's not producing nutrient dense foods. And so my own family and my business partners have taken it upon ourselves to tout the things you're touting. We need nutrient dense foods. How do we get nutrient dense food? The only way is through healthy soil. We have to, so consumers, through their buying dollar, can vote and say, hey, I'm only going to spend my buying dollar at those farms and ranches that are producing nutrient dense food. And when consumers are educated enough to spend their money that way, that will truly change production agriculture.
Yeah. There's no question about it, and it's been my professional training is in as a physician, and any physician or healthcare professional who is serious about integrating natural health principles, in my mind, eventually has to come to the soil, whether they're gardening it themselves or seeking out people who are using principles like you're teaching in regenerative agriculture to produce bio or nutrient dense foods. I mean, it's just that's the conclusion. It's the inevitable path that need. And if you haven't reached that yet, you're going to reach it if you continue in your journey. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just inevitable. So, that's one of our strategies. Is we realized early on we can't change these federal policies. It's literally impossible. Well, nothing's impossible, but it's close to it. So we
Right.
have to go from the
Right.
ground up, and then that's doable, and we are making changes. So
Yep.
I'd like to get your insights and comment on the historical perspective because we've got this history, many centuries, thousands of years, historically, where humans have been using foolish, and that's being kind, agricultural principles, and they've really ignored the regenerative principles. And I'm wondering what your perspective and take on this is. And are there any cultures that stand out as being exemplary in understanding these principles and applying them?
Well, one of the things that two things come to my mind right away. Uh, First, this journey I went on one of the things, realize this was before internet was prevalent. So I was spending
Hmm.
time in the library trying to research, okay, how did they keep producing profitable crops in abundance without all these synthetic inputs? And I came across Thomas Jefferson's old journals, what he was doing in Monticello. And he was growing turnips and vetches and these different crops in order to help build the soil health up so he could keep producing his cash crops. So I thought, well, if he can do it, so can I. So I started to applying those principles back in the mid 90s. The other place I found real interest was in what the Native Americans were doing.
Hmm.
There was a book written called Indian Bird Woman's Garden, and it was about a Native American and what she was planting along the Missouri River centuries ago. And it was the three sisters, corn, bean, and squash, planted together. And that's the principle of diversity. And she was doing it in a way where she wasn't cultivating the garden. She was simply removing a little bit of that armor and putting the seeds in. And I thought, this isn't rocket science. This is just using those type of principles. So there are those indigenous people all over the world that have lived in the same ecosystem for centuries that were doing a good job. But the current industrial model and the mindset of man is we're trying to impose our will on nature. Well, that just isn't going to work. Nature will win every time.
Yes, yes, indeed. So let's talk about the future. You mentioned earlier at the beginning that you believe about 5% of the farms are being regeneratively using regenerative agricultural principles, and you've been teaching these for what, 15 years now, these principles. And so you're out in the trenches, and you can, with these farmers that are doing this. And I'm wondering, as to your observation of the trend, is it like doubling every year? Do we have an exponential increase? And even though the numbers are small initially, if you continue at that
Yeah.
rate, it's going to be big eventually. And what are your projections as to when we think we might hit a tipping point?
Yeah, I think right now it's less than 5%, but it has easily been doubling every year. And I
That
think,
is that is
yeah,
exponential growth. That is
it
exponential
is.
growth.
And
Yes.
it's exciting. And now I will say I'm excited. Our partnership of soil health consultants, we're being approached now by some of the big players. And I mean
All right.
the big players in the food industry, big players in production agriculture, asking us, can we come and teach either their employees or their producers these regenerative practices? There's zero doubt in my mind that exponential growth is going to increase. In fact, we really think it's going to accelerate. We can't even
Wow.
begin to keep up right now with the number of requests that we're getting. And uh, I don't feel I'm not going to mention names right here, but I
Mhm.
will say that it is the big players in the food industry in the United States. They're taking note and they realize that their client, who is the consumer, is
Mhm.
telling them,
Mhm.
we want change, we want nutrient dense food. And they know the only way they're going to get it is through healthy soil. Now, I'm just going to make a prediction, and
Mhm.
I talk about the principle of diversity and how people have been growing monoculture cash crops. We're seeing some very exciting things occurring right now with what's called polyculture cash crops.
Mhm.
So a farmer would go out and he wouldn't just plant one crop in his field, for instance, like barley, but he'll add to that, he'll add peas and canola and maybe wheat, and plant several species together. And what that's doing, that's creating these synergies, feeding soil biology, cycling more carbon from the atmosphere into the soil, and it's increasing the profitability for the farmer. People always ask, and one of the questions we always get asked is, well, you can't feed the world with regenerative agriculture. And I just laugh because I say, okay, let's
The
think
only
about it.
option. It's the
Yeah,
only
it's the
pragmatic
only
option.
well, first of all, the figures I had from the World Food Bank in 2017, we produced enough feed to feed well over 10 billion people. So
Mhm.
we're already producing enough feed. The pro enough food, excuse me. The problem is it's not nutrient dense, healthy food,
Mhm.
and we're not getting it distributed. And then you look at how regenerative farms stack production models. They're not just producing a monoculture of corn or soybeans, they're producing those crops, but then also all the livestock and fruit and vegetables and poultry and many different species. So they're producing many more calories and it's nutrient dense calories per acre. It's not this blank carbohydrates that we're producing now.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think there's exciting things coming up. I think it's going to grow very quickly, and it can't happen soon enough in my book.
Yeah, so let me just make a few comments on that. First, on exponential growth, and at the very beginning of exponential growth, you cannot notice a difference. It's just
Mhm.
imperceptible for the
Yeah.
first, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 doublings, but after a while, it becomes impressive. It's pretty similar to the solar industry. You're actually increasing at a faster rate than the solar industry, which is another encouraging move. But this is this has been one of the most inspiring and exciting interviews because it shows positive hope that we are making a change. And really want to emphasize here to everyone watching this is that you you specifically can be part of that change. And no, you don't have to go out and integrate regenerative agricultural principles. Great if you do, but you don't have to. All you need to do is vote with your dollars. And that is the most powerful influence that big industry, that federal regulatory agencies, they have no a way to regulate or control. They can't control the way you spend your dollars. So they try to, but they can't. So you can accelerate this change. So it's a very empowering message that you're providing. So I'm wondering for those, to continue this exponential growth and even accelerate it even a bit faster, if those people watching would like more information or know some farmers or their the farmers at their farmers market to learn and understand this better, how would they get this information
Yeah, and I agree
aside
with
from your
what.
book,
Yeah.
dirt to soil?
I agree. Well, I agree with what you just said. And what I would really like is I would like people all over the world to start supporting local. Buy
Hmm.
local. Get to know your farmer or rancher. Now, all you have to do if you want to find out more, if you have access to the internet, just Google soil health. It's as simple as that. And our group is Soil Health Consultants. We'll be launching a new website of which there'll be a lot of information on regenerative agriculture. So you can go to soilhealthconsultants.com or Google Soil Health, and we'll show up there. There's many YouTube videos on regenerative agriculture principles. And most importantly, there's people using
Hmm.
these practices in every country all over the world. So seek them out and then, as you said, vote with your buying dollar.
Yeah, and then you can continue to catalyze this change and not only impact you and your future generations, but also the planet. I mean, the planet needs us is probably even more than we
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And it's just it really is a tragic crime on what humanity has done to the planet through the ignorance of these types of principles. I mean, to have millions of tons billions of tons of topsoil lost every year is inexcusable. It's just inexcusable.
Yeah. One of the things we like to teach people is that this has multiple ramifications. I mean, we will take carbon out of the atmosphere using regenerative ag principles. We will hold nutrients on the farms and ranches instead of having them look at the dead zone in the Gulf and look at the problems with the drinking water in the Great Lakes, the problems, the lack of shortage of water in the southwestern United States. So we can heal the water cycle. We can heal the nutrient cycle. We're going to produce more nutrient dense food. We're going to have a healthier society because of this. So this has ramifications across many fronts. We're not talking about simply farmers and ranchers and gardeners here. We're talking about all society.
Absolutely. So I think we've done a pretty good job of covering the book and the important principles. But is there anything else you'd like to add before we leave?
Well, I just encourage people to take it upon themselves. I end my book with a chapter about a story about a lady in the inner city who called me. What can she do to produce healthy, nutrient dense food for the children in the inner city. And I challenge the readers who are reading my book, do something. Just do something. If you're a consumer, vote with your buying dollar. If you're a farmer, a rancher, or a gardener, do something in the practices you use to produce nutrient-dense food. But all of us can make a difference.
Yes, indeed. And, just emphasize the point again, that is true from the regenerative agriculture farmers to the consumers, you the consumers, and probably you as a consumer have even more powerful influence because you're collectively far outnumber them and can force the big companies, the big players that Gabe is not disclosing who's consulting with him, but this is and beyond exciting change, because that's where the change needs to occur. Yes, we need these local farmers, but we need to change it at the top levels, and it's so exciting to hear this is happening.
That's right.
All right,
Yeah.
well, you keep up the great work. You're one of the main leaders in the world in this, and you're doing a magnificent job. It's going to be quite a legacy that you're leaving behind.
Well, thank you.
To have been a major catalyst in the transition back to healthy regenerative agricultural principles, I mean, that's just incredible.
Well, it's not me, it's all of us together. And I thank you for the work you're doing. It's been a real pleasure being interviewed by you, and it was a great pleasure hosting you on our ranch.
Yeah, that was good. All right. Well, the book again is Dirt to Soil, and it's available on Amazon. So pick up a copy if you have any interest in this. And I think you'll, obviously, Gabe elaborates in much more in detail on some of the points we discussed in the interview. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe now and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.